And hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It is Friday night, and tonight we are talking about pay differentials with between East Coast and West Coast mariners with Military Sealift Command. And if you are a new hire or even been sailing with MSC for a while, you might not be cued in on exactly why we have these differences and kind of have a broader understanding. I seen a young lady today, or I think a video that she had made previously, but she talked about how she wanted to talk to the union because she didn't feel it was fair that East Coast mariners make less than West Coast mariners. Well, basically that drills down to the fact that West Coast mariners, it's more expensive for West Coast people to live than it is for East Coast people for the most part, unless you're in the DC area or some more bougie spots. But the cost of living in San Diego is significantly higher than Norfolk, Virginia. And in order to maintain a good recruitment balance across the country, they've made a different pay scale between the coasts because the West Coast is traditionally a lot more expensive. Cost of living, rent, food, gas, everything, taxes, everything in California is just more expensive. And in order to keep a balanced fleet and have people that want to be in different portions of the country, they made this balance. And I'm going to give you an example of the pay scale as an operations chief, because that's where I have a lot of my experience before I was after I was an AB for a while. So the pay scale for an East Coast operations chief, let's break that down real quick, and that is $60,723. That's the annual salary for an ops chief on the East Coast. So on the West Coast, that salary is $70,223. So you can see that that is just shy of $10,000 in pay more, or I should say less, for the East Coast. So a lot of people are like, well, Jesus Louises, that's pretty dramatic. But let's break it down a little bit more so you guys can even see it and understand that eventually it kind of counterbalances, but it's just a decision you have to make with being an employee with Military Sealift Command and which coast you want to work on or be assigned to. So if we took that $60,723 and broke that down by a weekly basis, that would be $1,167 a week. That is your base salary as an ops chief before taxes and before overtime. So that's doable salary, in my mind, for the position you're starting out in. Now, if you were a West Coast mariner as an ops chief, you would make $1,350 every week. So I was on a ship previously, and I was sailing on an East Coast ship, and that ship, we had a previous ops chief that was assigned there before I'd gotten to the ship. And once I got there, we were kind of doubled up for a while. The captain wanted us to do a really big turnover. And me and the other ops chief were talking, and I had left my leaves and earnings statement out. And he looked at it, and I didn't think nothing of it, but he was like, man, how come you make more than me? And that was because I was a West Coast ops chief and he was an East Coast ops chief. And he was very upset about it. He wanted to go talk to the captain. He felt like he was being done over wrong. And this is just one of the things that you learn as time goes on, that it balances out, but there is a difference. And it's just something you need to understand, and you got to accept. The union's not going to change it. The union already knows about this. This is a cost of living adjustment between the coasts, and also kind of an operational op tempo issue as well. So, and we'll get to that a little bit more. But the differences in that weekly pay are obvious. But let's look at the overtime rate. So for an East Coast ops chief, he makes $44.98 an hour for overtime. But a West Coast ops chief makes less in his overtime, which makes only $36.57. So the East Coast chief is making more. But if you looked at by the hourly overtime rate, But if you looked at like the op tempo between the two fleets, if you get stationed on an East Coast ship, the Atlantic Ocean is a lot smaller than the Pacific Ocean. So when you go on deployments on a West Coast ship, you have a lot more transit time. You have a lot more of world geography, geographic regions to cover than you do on an East Coast ship. East Coast ships are typically covering the Atlantic, the Med, and then some into the Arabian Gulf and into the Indian Ocean and whatnot. Where on the West Coast, you're covering the whole Pacific Fleet, the Indian Ocean, and the Pacific Fleet has a vast operating op tempo. So you very seldomly will you see a West Coast ship sitting in port on the West Coast. Where East Coast ships, there's a lot more of them, and you'll have a better chance of being home more often. So your operational op tempo is a lot less on an East Coast ship compared to a West Coast ship traditionally. So you will be gone away. If you live on the West Coast, you're going to be gone a lot. You very seldomly are going to be on a ship on the West Coast and actually be home and be able to go home and have an apartment or have a house or anything there. But if you're in Virginia, the likelihood of being able to have that is a better option, I think. But so let's show how this can kind of balance out a little bit, because you guys need to understand with that overtime rate, let's look at these two pay scales. So let's say we worked 20 hours a week. So an East Coast ops chief works 20 hours overtime, and a West Coast ops chief, East and West both work 20 hours overtime this week. The East Coast ops chief will make $2,066 that week doing 20 hours of overtime. Now the West Coast chief will make $20,081 complete doing 20 hours overtime. So you can see that once the overtime kind of kicks in, they pretty much balance out. And people have when you're deployed, there's usually more of a chance of getting more overtime. So to balance it out on West Coast ships, you're going to get probably more overtime, but you're not going to get paid as much. On East Coast ships, you might not be available to get as much overtime, but when you do, you're going to get compensated for it. So it just balances out. And I think the biggest secret of handling issues when it comes to your overtime and your salary and everything is just don't worry about what everybody else is making. Just think about how much you're making and try to get as much overtime and be as valuable to the company as you can so that you can get as much overtime as possible. Because if you're a jack of all trades and you're a valued employee, they're going to open up opportunities for you to make more overtime and do better and progress in your career and make more money and keep leveling up. And that's what should be our focus as mariners, is continuing to level up your training, your education, your qualifications, and your maritime credentials. So, but hopefully that kind of lays it out a little bit more clear for you guys. If you have any questions, leave them below. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, and we'll hit you on the next one. Have a good one. Peace.